So we're going to start off with a couple questions that are pertinent to our study of Isaiah. And so kind of some thought stuff just to kind of get our brains working, our minds going. Why can't people recognize their own sin? Meaning, we all can read a Bible and read a text and says, this sin bad, this sin bad, this sin bad. But oftentimes, people don't see their actions. Now, if you have some of the big ones, right, murdering, obviously someone knows, yeah, I took that person's life, right? Stealing, yeah, I stole whatever. But oftentimes, sin isn't always so just apparent, right? Sometimes it's, people have to come to grips with the actions and the things that they're doing are not okay, and maybe they're hurtful in some ways. But what stops people from recognizing their own sin and shortcomings? What do we got? Maybe you. What stops you sometimes? Maybe you've had to be confronted by somebody, right? And it took you a while to process that. Bob will let you go, and then we'll give Jim a chance back here as well.
I'm too busy looking at your sins and trying to pick them apart.
Are you talking to me? I've got a lot of them, I know, Jim. All right, okay, so one of our problems is, and Jesus obviously brings it up on the Sermon on the Mount, right? There's the speck and the plank. And I don't think Jesus was really saying that one person has a speck and another person has a plank. His point is, we often can find the most, we can dig into someone's life, right? And we can dig and dig and dig and find, anything for people we don't really like or care for, have affection for. And yet we often miss, right, the things. So a lot of times, a lot of that comes in comparison. Comparison, right? Well, I'm not as bad as so-and-so. And so my sins or my actions, they're just not as bad.
I was kind of along that line. I was thinking self-denial because you see something but you don't really. I don't talk loud enough.
No, it's for the people at home.
Oh, okay.
They can't hear.
They can't
from
hear, no matter how loud I talk.
Online.
Okay. Because sometimes we don't think with self-denial. We're not thinking along the terms that we're that bad or that what we've done, we kind of like want to slide under it some way, and just not wanting to admit that maybe we not doing something right.
Okay, I like that last part. Not willing to admit. What stops people from not willing to admit?
They don't feel guilty.
Responsibility. Because oftentimes when someone's being confronted with sin, it's because there's been a consequence of their sin, right? And so if they own the sin, they also have to own the consequence, responsibility. And they don't want that. They don't want to believe or see or acknowledge, whatever it may be, that my action resulted in that consequence or that whatever it may be. Bob?
Well, like you said a minute ago, we're so busy looking at the other person's sin that we can't see the own mote in our eye. And it goes back to, like say, we fail to recognize our own sins because we're too busy looking for other people's sin.
Yeah.
Trying to justify why we're not as bad as they are.
That's another good one. Desensitized. And oftentimes that comes with, well, what's so bad with that? It's not that you're not denying that you're doing the thing. You're denying the thing is actually a wrong thing, right? It's just not wrong, right? One of the things I think, just to kind of probably put us all on a similar playing field, or at least things we know of, like the music we can end up listening to, right? Can we become desensitized to music because... there are times, I was driving in the car, this actually happened, I think on our way back from Myrtle Beach last week, and I was going to put on a song my dad used to listen to. I love the song, Lover Boy, right, sings it, And, I started thinking about the lyrics, like as they're about to start playing. I'm like, I can't let my kids listen to that. Like I had no idea. I just had the turn me loose, that kind of stuff in my head. And I wanted to hear, I'm like, I'm not going to let them listen to that, because if they can, and they may not even get the lyrics. But because I grew up listening to it, right? Maybe it's language in the music, whatever it may be. There's worse things out there that I could be listening to, so this is okay. So a lot of times it's desensitized, we've been used to it, right? I remember talking to someone one time about like music, or not music, but movies. Well, if I can't or I can't watch a movie that doesn't have this in it, then what can I watch, right? And, once again, we all going to have our own standard by which, but since we have some Carnes people here, I'm going to use a Steve Higginbotham illustration here. He used to use this illustration about a $100 bill, right? How much garbage are you willing to go through to get to the $100 bill, right? Because a lot of times, well, this movie has got a great ending, or it's got a great plot point, but you've got to sit through 80% of it that's full of junk. Like how much junk are you willing, how dirty are you willing to get to then say, well, there was something at the end, there was something at the bottom that I liked. How dirty do you have to be before it becomes, wrong? And once again, it's very hard for us to put you can't do this. But oftentimes I wonder if the reason why people don't want us to put well, you can't tell me I can't, is because they don't want to recognize that maybe that's not okay. And because once you call that out, well, that eliminates all the other stuff that I may be watching or reading or doing. Anyone else? Okay. So is this like the ends justifying the means sort of thing? Like they want a good outcome, and so like they situational ethics. Okay, so let's take situation ethics off for a moment. Intentions being good. Can anyone think of a person in Scripture who had good intentions but were living in sin? Paul. His conscience was clear. Right? He'll even say, let's go to Romans 10 for a moment. He'll even say this about his fellow Jews. We beat up on the Jews a lot, right? They denied Jesus. They did all these types of things. But look what Jesus said, or look what Paul says about his own brothers. So chapter 10, verse 1 says, "Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved, for I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge." So to me, they had good intentions, zeal, passion, but they're just ignorant on what's the best way to get this thing done, right? So a lot of times it's a lack of wisdom, right? How many times, and I'm going to try to be careful here, but I've sat in groups where we've sat around and shared, maybe men have shared the things they're struggling with. And sometimes the advice that is given from Christians are sound really good, very worldly advice, but actually the opposite of what Jesus says will solve that issue. Right? If you want to be first in Jesus' mind, what do you got to do? You got to be last. Right? If you want to be like the master, you got to wash feet. Well, like in today's world, to get ahead and to be ahead, serving isn't going to get you there in many, in our mind, it's counterintuitive to what solves the problem, right? Serving is just, it's out of there. So a lot of times it's intentions. They think they're doing okay. They think they're doing good, but their knowledge or their wisdom or what source they're using, sometimes it's counsel they're given. Well, I was counseled to, I remember Gary Hampton telling us a story of his, I believe it was maybe a sister of his or a relative of his. They were having some marital problems. People have marital problems, right? went to a counselor, not a Christian counselor, but a well-recommended one, and her advice essentially was, well, maybe you need to go out and try some other people to realize how much you love your wife or you love your husband. Huh? I was listening to a thing today. You know, a lot of times when we're talking, now we're all adults here, besides there's a baby, but, you know, be careful, little baby, what you hear, right? Put the earmuffs on. The premarital sex. Oftentimes the advice is, and this is the illustration or example, well, don't you test drive a car before you buy it? And that is the sage wisdom that people give. Well, guess what? You're trading in a car every 7 years. You know, you're not making a long-term investment anyway. Where's the commitment to, if I get in this and maybe something's broken, I'm in it for the long haul because I've made a covenant. Gary Hampton, going back to him as well. Him and his wife, they got married. A year later, come to find out she has MS. Well, what does he do? There's a lot of things they could not do as husband and wife that we would enjoy. Well, you know, could he have gotten out? The world would say, man, that's a long life to live without being able to. And he's like, no, stuck it out. Joe, you had your hand up?
Well, I was going to say about that.
We got a mic.
Test drive a car. I was going to talk about that analogy you used with test driving a car. Every study they've done shows that divorce is higher, percentages are higher if people live together before they get married.
Yep.
So the data suggests the test driving the car theory is, you know, it's rubbish. It's not true.
Well, yeah, and it
Right.
gets back to you're not willing to commit. You're not. It shows a lack of level of being able to commit to something greater than that. Marriage is so much more than that one action, right? Marriage is so much more, and it's you just don't have a willingness to commit. Rick, you have your hand up? No? All right, itching your head.
I was going to say, if they say test drive like that, are they going to tell you to test drive for 30 years, being with that person, living together, finances?
Yeah, how long you got to test drive, right?
If you're
All right.
test drive it for that long, so you can live that long afterwards, what all you test drive it?
Yeah.
That's the theory.
I think it's a lack of commitment, which goes back to a lot of times when people sin is because they're not willing to make the hard choices. A lot of times the easy path is full of sin. The hard path is doing the right thing the right way, no matter possibly the consequences that come with it. But oftentimes the consequences of doing the right thing always turn out better than the consequence of doing it the easy way. Okay. Anyone else?
Hey, Jesse, there's commercials that are on right now about choose your hard. One of them was a quit smoking commercial.
Yeah.
You know, she was all stressed, so that's why she smoked. Well, now she has to have open heart surgery. She's 44 years old, open heart surgery. And she's saying, you know, open heart surgery is pretty stressful too. So choose your hard. It's hard to quit, but this is hard too.
Yeah.
So really, what people are doing is they're, rather than choosing the hard, they're choosing the easy. And the easy way of floating down the river will never take you where you want to go. It's just going to take you wherever it goes, right? And that's what we have to stay away from.
It's why many people end up living with regret. If I could do it over again, if I knew what I knew now and went back 20 years, well, most of the time they knew. Someone was telling them. Someone was giving them the advice. They just didn't do it. They didn't listen. They didn't think it was important at the time. And then 20 years later, when they've made all the mistakes, they look back and go, man, I wish I could have done different. You could have. You could have.
I think about the kids that I work with, and I think so many of them do not have the guidance from parents that would keep them from making the wrong decisions. And every day, we're trying to teach them to make the right decisions, to study and not think of something else that they want to do. And it goes back to teaching our children And as Christians, we have to make sure that we do that and they understand every part of their life.
Yeah.
That decision, they make one little decision, whether you're going to do your homework or who your friends are going to be, is going to affect you for the rest of your life.
Yep. Yep. And I'm going to leave this question possibly for the end, but I want you guys to be thinking about it as we're reading Isaiah. So let's open up to Isaiah chapter 9. So Isaiah, just kind of give a brief, right? Judah is being attacked by Assyria and the northern kingdom. Ahaz is wondering, when is this attack going to end? We've been given the prophecy of when this child is born. He will be Emmanuel. He'll be God with us. Isaiah will have a child himself, right, with the prophetess, or most likely it's Isaiah's child, who will also be born. But the invasion is coming. But don't worry, the ultimate hope, there's a child who will be born, and as we looked at last week, we can't jump straight to the Messiah. Remember, a lot of times a king, if he was in a theocracy, which is what Israel was, a theocracy means their God was the divine law, and the king just followed what? The divine law. So a lot of times when the king did something, he was a divine act. It was a divine action because he was doing it on behalf of his God. So most likely we're speaking about a Hezekiah, right? Because we're still talking about the destruction of the Assyrians. When will the Assyrians be destroyed? Well, when this Prince of Peace, this wonderful counselor, this mighty God, this everlasting, right? This one who will sit on the throne of David. The first person that is pointing to is a Hezekiah, Josiah most likely. Jesus, as we talked about what fulfillment means, Jesus fills that to the fullest. He's actually mighty God. He's actually the Prince of Peace, right? Hezekiah wasn't God, but Jesus fulfills that, right? But what we're going to now get into is Israel, because of their sin of attacking Judah and lining themselves up with a foreign nation, God is going to call them out on their sin and tell them they're going to be destroyed. Well, what is their sin? Let's look. So, verse 8, the Lord has sent a word against Jacob, and it will fall on Israel. Now, here's an interesting thing about Isaiah. Isaiah is preaching to the southern tribe of Judah, but oftentimes he's bringing accusation against Israel. Why does he say, hey, this is a word to Jacob, or against Jacob, but it was going to fall on Israel? This is a word, an oracle, a preaching, a sermon, we'd call it, on Jacob, but all the things that are going to happen are going to fall on Israel. Why would he say that? Israel is the example of what happens when you do these sins. This is a word to Jacob to not do what? To not do what Israel was doing. Now, Israel has not fallen yet. But Isaiah is pointing out, hey, what you're about to witness in history, there's going to be some history that happens. And I want you to know that God is the one controlling this. God is the one orchestrating this. This is not Isaiah after the fact looking back on history going, here's what happened in history. He's saying, hey, some history is about to happen. Some things are about to happen, because it's not till chapter about 36 and 37 when Assyria and the northern tribes are actually taken into captivity and all these punishments are going to be taken out. So he's seeing the future. This is what's going to happen. And Jacob learned from it. Don't follow into the same mistakes. Watch what he says. He says, and all the people will know, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say in pride and in arrogance of the heart, the bricks have fallen, but we will build with dressed stones. The sycamores have been cut down, but we will put cedars in their place. So what he's saying is, they will know that their pride and arrogance of saying all that they're saying is leading to their destruction. And that's why I have this question up here, right? They right now think that their actions are not going to have any consequence. Okay, some bricks, some buildings have fallen, some trees have been cut, there's been war, but we can do what? We can rebuild. We can rebuild. We'll be okay. We'll be good. And Isaiah is saying there's going to come a day when they will know that the sins they're committing now are going to be the result of their punishment. And they're going to look back and go, why didn't we listen then? They're going to know God orchestrated this. Their sins brought them here. Because, if you're imagine if you're being a historical figure, right? You're living back during the ancient Near Eastern times. Do countries war and fight? Does everything in your mind have to be a God-directed thing? Is it because your sin you're being destroyed, or is it just that nation was stronger than this nation? Sometimes it was just that nation was stronger than this nation, right? When Assyria came and conquers Egypt, it's because Assyria had the better battlement. But what Isaiah is saying, when you get conquered, is not going to be because the enemy was stronger. It's because you were full of sin and wickedness. But they're right now in their current circumstances, they're not able to do what? They're not able to recognize. And the one thing they're really not able to recognize, this is the most important thing, what their sin is doing to them. They think the actions they are taking are of wisdom, maybe some good intentions. They think this is what's best for the nation. This is what's best for Israel. And God's saying the thing that you think is what's best for Israel is actually the thing that's going to cause it to fall. Teaming up with Assyria sounds like a really good idea, because at that time Assyria is the superpower. Who are you going to want to align yourself with if you have an opportunity to? The superpower, right? Why do people bow down to, the United States when we do certain things? We're the superpower. They're scared that if we actually get up and act, what's going to happen? There's going to be consequences. We got the bigger guns, we got the bigger tank, we got the better army, right? It seems like they're becoming less scared and less timid, but that's how it used to be, right? The Teddy Roosevelt, right? The rule with the big stick, right? So get in bed with Assyria. That'll be really good, right? It won't be. They don't realize their lack of trust in God, their lack of repenting of their sins, which we're about to get into, is going to cause them to downfall. Now, who does God always attack first? Who does God always hold accountable first for the sins of the nation? The leaders. The leaders. And we'll kind of get personal real quick, when you talk about organizations or even churches. Can a church ever rise above their leadership? Will a nation ever rise above their leadership? Sometimes they can. Sometimes they recognize, hey, we don't got good leaders, and there may be a civil war that comes, or there may be some, overthrowing those who are in charge. But oftentimes, when Israel had a bad king, how was the nation? They were evil. The next king comes and cleans it all up, and what does everybody all of a sudden become? They become religious, right? They become God-fearing. And then the son comes and reestablishes all of those idols again, and what exactly does the people do? It's like they have no integrity. They're just being blindly led. Now, God has designed Israel to be led by leaders, through shepherds, through priests, through their king. So first and foremost, a king needs to set the standard, needs to set the example.
I'll just say, kind of look at it as a true north of a moral compass should be the king, our God, and they kind of let a different king fall back in that spot.
Yeah, ultimately, remember Deuteronomy 17, what was every king of Israel supposed to do the moment they became king? What was one of their first things they were supposed to do? Read the law and actually have their own copy written for them. That's why we have so many copies of the Old Testament, is because every time a king came, they had a copy, not just that was read to them, but that was handmade for them to have. So they had to sit and, can you imagine someone sitting there while, the king's got to sit there and listen from Genesis 1, right? Now, whatever they had at the time, most of the times it was the Torah that was rewritten. We're not talking about Joshua and Judges, but imagine sitting through Leviticus while someone's penning it, right? In Hebrew script, so it's real slow, but that's what they had to do. Why would God have them do that? What's so important about listening to the entire law, not only having it read, but also having it written down for you? remembering, retention. But can you say you did not know? Can you use that as an excuse when you've had your first week, I don't know how long it took, right, was if you did the right thing. But what do we know that when Josiah came, what did they find? The lost book of the law. Most likely it was Deuteronomy. Most people think Deuteronomy, maybe parts of Leviticus. But they had not had Deuteronomy for many years. They had the story, but not the retelling that Moses gives to say, this is where we messed up. These are the things that God predicts, a lot of the blessing and cursing that come with the exile. Hey, this country is going to come and overtake you if this is one of the curses. That book was gone. How long? We don't know. But we do know when Josiah reestablished the Passover, they claim that it was not done like that since the time of David. 400 years, just under 400 years, that the Passover had not been done since the time of David. That's insane. That's crazy. That means something went wrong. And so here's what God's going to say to leaders. Well, look at verse 11. But the Lord raises the adversaries of Rezin, that's Assyria, against him, stirs up his enemies, the Syrians on the east, the Philistines on the west, to devour Israel with open mouth. For all his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. Look at verse 13. The people did not turn to him who struck them, nor inquire of the Lord of the hosts. So Israel has become so hard-hearted. A lot of times, when you read the book of Judges, what happens when they're in captivity for so long? What eventually do? They break and go, okay, God, send us a judge. They won't even admit. They won't even call upon the one who can save them. That's either pride, stubbornness, arrogance, or ignorance. They just haven't been taught. They're not having the stories retold like they used to. Hey, if you call on God, they won't even do it. They refuse, no matter how bad it gets. They refuse and they dig their heels in and say, we're not repenting. We're not turning to the Lord.
Jesse, is that the language? The people did not turn to him who struck them? So you think about it. If you're standing there and then all of a sudden you get whacked in the back, what do you normally do? You're going to turn around, try to find out why this person struck you and how you can get them to stop. And that's what they're refusing to do. They're not even acknowledging that they got struck.
Yeah. No, they won't acknowledge it. And the thing is, it's the Philistines, and God's going to use all these other nations, but God's telling them now, when I send these nations, it's not them who's coming. It's me. And they refuse to turn. But look who gets the blame at first. So the Lord cut off from Israel head and tail, palm, branch, and reed in one day. The elder and the honored man is the head. The prophet who teaches lies is the tail. So you've got the king as the head, and the prophet, why do you have a tail? What does a tail do? Wags, and it directs, though, doesn't it? It's like a rudder, right, on animals. They use their tail for balance. It's what keeps them in check. You remove a tail from certain animals, and they're just going to fall over. They're not going to be able to handle themselves. Like when you get hit in the ear, right? Your balance gets thrown off. The head is going the opposite direction. But the tail, the prophets who are supposed to be calling out, right? What did Nathan do to David when he sinned? He called him out. So when the king was doing the wrong thing, the prophets are there to say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. Well, we've got prophets and the head and the tail, the both ends, both leading the people astray. God says, I'm going to cut them off. Watch what he's going to do. He says, those who guide this people have been leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are swallowed up. Therefore, the Lord does not rejoice over their young men. He has no compassion on their fatherless and widows. For everyone is godless and an evildoer. Every mouth speaks folly. For all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand has stretched out. So here's what we learn. Not only do the leaders hold responsibility for their sins, but also so did the people. You can't claim, well, they told me to. You can't claim, well, this is what they taught us. There is responsibility on the individual, is there not? Eventually, there's got to be some responsibility on the individual, right? You can't. Now, the lead is going to get a big punishment, but ultimately, God's going, all of you joined in. Who stood up and said anything? Now, there's a remnant we'll get into as we kind of get into this that are kind of, trying to do the right thing, but it's hard to do the right thing, right? How can you go do a correct Passover when the priests who are doing the Passover won't have a Passover? Can you have a Passover? You're not a priest. You're not a Levite. All right? It's kind of like why the sons of Eli were in such trouble. When people showed up to the temple or the altar to give their sacrifice, and they're supposed to be burning the fat to who? Who does the fat get burned to? The fat get burned to the Lord, but Eli's sons were taking the fat and eating it. And the people were going, this isn't right. And they were basically like, what are you going to do about it? So how do you do the right thing when your religion is set up reliant upon the leadership and the priests to take your offering, to take your sacrifice? I mean, they were forgiven when they offered up an animal. Imagine if you brought an animal and they don't sacrifice it, or they use it for a meal for themselves. What are you to do? Now, in that case, that's where God is gracious and compassionate. It's like when Daniel, right, when he was in captivity in Babylon, why did he fast for 3 weeks? Those 3 weeks were during the time of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He realized, hey, I can't be in Jerusalem doing what I'm supposed to be doing during this time of the year. And all he had was fasting and praying. And he recognized it's because of the sins of my forefathers, right? The sins of my people put us in this situation. But he was going to make the best of it, but he still couldn't do it, right? These people weren't even trying. Oh, you don't want to take my sacrifice? Okay. Oh, you want me to worship to the Astrod? Okay. All right, you want to put my baby on a, thing and offer them to this God? Let's do it. They were fully committing to whatever the leadership was telling them to do. Not okay. Right? So responsibility falls on everybody. You can't blame someone else for your own sin. Right? God will always give you a way of escape. Even if that means standing up like Daniel's friends did, and they said, we're not bowing down. Well, we're going to throw you in a furnace. Throw me in the furnace. Or we're going to put you in a lion's den. Guess I'm lion meat tonight, unless the Lord is merciful and rescues me. Right? That's the attitude. But that's hard. Isn't that a hard attitude? Isn't that hard to do when everybody else is doing it and everybody else is going that way? And you've got the people that you respect and who taught you since you were little, taught you Torah, taught you how to read your Bible, taught you Hebrew lettering, taught you Hebrew scripture, and you're now telling me that this mentor of mine is leading me astray? That's why after you get past 2 or 3 generations, God's like, this is never going to change. We got to stop it. Because nobody even knows how to read the law correctly anymore because everybody's been taught incorrectly. All right. My sermon is over there. So, look at verse 19. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched. The people are like fuel for the fire. No one spares another. Would God relent if they repented? Yeah, but the people are the fuel. Their sins are what causing God to keep, okay, I'm going to keep throwing the fire on. Right? Your sins are making this worse. And there's a lot of people who, when they're already in like this full sinful state, what do? Rather than recognize and try to get out of it and stop. Oh, I'm already here. And they dig in and they just keep going. And then they get to a point where it says no one spares one another. They're coming after each other now. They're not just have an enemy of Judah or have an enemy of Assyria. Now they're attacking one another. Right? So sin always corrupts, it makes it worse, and it divides. And even if you started off doing sin together, what eventually is going to happen? That sin's going to separate. Sin destroys. It doesn't unite. It destroys every single person it touches. Look at verse 20. They slice meat on the right, but are still hungry. They devour on the left, but are not satisfied. Each devours the flesh of his own arm. Nothing they can do is going to have any fruit unless they change. They can slice meat, they eat it, what happens? They're still hungry. They get to the point, he says, what do they start eating to satisfy themselves? They eat their own arm. Now, we're not talking about people who are cannibals. He's using this as an illustration. Eventually, you've run out of other people to hurt. Who do you really start hurting after that? It starts becoming internal, right? It starts becoming internal. You start destroying yourself. Manasseh will devour Ephraim. Ephraim devours Manasseh. Together they are against Judah. So when they fight each other, when Manasseh and Ephraim finally turn, which are, by the way, they're two northern tribes, when they finally turn, is there a victor? They destroy each other. They get to the point where neither of them, even if one won, they didn't win with a large enough margin. Like most battles, one of the reasons why they stopped it or threw the white, they realized, and they let them kind of just go their own way, that they've lost so many casualties. If we keep going, even if we win, there's the next nation looking to do what? They're waiting for us to get weak enough in this battle to come and take us over. So they will stop a battle, or they will retreat knowing we've become too weak. Even if we're going to win this battle, we're going to lose overall. And so they've destroyed each other. Together they are against Judah, for all his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. So, who's the leading cause of all this that's about to happen? And we're going to read about some of these things. It's the Lord. Their sin caused God to intervene in a way that punished them for their sin, and they don't even recognize that they're dying and they're killing themselves. All right. Thank you. We'll get into chapter 11 next week. Or 10.